David, you broke the news last week. I literally fell out of my chair when I got the Bloomberg alert or the redhead. It said GM is going back into autonomy. What the heck is going on at GM?
Well, if you were to talk to them about it, they would say they never left because they said they were just working on personal AVs, beyond what they do with Super Cruise, where they were still going to work on essentially level 4 technology. Now, by the way, one of the things that Sterling said in his internal meeting was they're not even going to use these SAE levels anymore. I kind of agree with him. I think that was useful for a while, but it can be a little bit misleading. But in any case, what he's doing is he wants to basically supercharge what they're doing and work harder to develop autonomy. He said in the meeting that it's the future. They have to be there. They want to build a personally owned AV, and that he wanted to bring in more talent to do it. And even if that meant calling back some people from Cruise, and they got rid of a lot of talent there. They laid off something like 1,000 people, maybe more after that. That's just kind of what got out in the news. Mo Elshenaway left. A lot of the other top tech people were gone. So they want to call some of them back or hire other people, and maybe other companies, other code writers, et cetera, experts in robotics and AI to come and really build these trucks out. Now, the surprising part about it for me was I figured GM would still work on a personally owned AV. And they said they were. Mary Barra talks about it in the earnings calls, but I kind of figured it would be, many, many years, if ever, before we actually saw this vehicle. They've already said, they said by mid-decade they would have a personally owned AV out there, but they've gotten rid of that goal. That's no longer valid. They said that, I think, 3 years ago. And I figured, okay, this will be worked on in some corner of GM R&D. They're sincere about it, but we just never see it. The company doesn't like the risk of it after what happened with Cruise. They have no interest in the robotaxi business. They might be right about that. But I think investors too, people watch the company just figured, yeah, okay, you'll work on it. But, GM's worked on fuel cells for years and we don't really see those. They have a hybrid system and, they're only bringing that out because the market is forcing them to do so. And because EV take rate is slower than they thought. GM is a company that historically has had extremely intelligent engineers working there. They have been on the forefront of technology in terms of development, but they have often sat back and let somebody else take the win, get there first, take the glory or the money. OnStar is one, they did commercialize it, but it never really took off. They had the EV1, they killed it right around the time Tesla was founded. And Tesla's was worth $1 trillion at one point, less now, but still way more than GM. And they were the EV king. GM worked on autonomy with Larry Burns and the DARPA challenge about 20 years ago. And, they when they got into financial trouble and headed into bankruptcy, fuel cells, EVs, autonomy, all this kind of stuff just went by the wayside and Waymo developed it. So I kind of thought, Mary Barra is much more serious about developing EVs, AVs, and software-related businesses than past CEOs of GM, but the company is just cautious when it comes to that. Their shareholders don't reward them for spending money on this stuff unless there's a clear path to profitability. And I figured, yeah, this would be kicked into some corner, but Sterling Anderson wants to make it happen. I don't know how many people they're going to hire, but he's clearly out there looking for talent, and he wants to push this.
But Sterling's new to GM. Can he make it happen? Does he have the support of Mary? Does he have the support of the board? Or are this going to turn into a buyback dividend conversation?
I mean, look, he has to, right? They hired him, and most of his background is autonomy related. He wrote, his PhD paper from 2012 or 13 was on basically more like driver assist if you go back and look at it, but it was autonomy related. He developed, he worked on autopilot for Tesla. Then he was at Aurora developing first robotaxis, then autonomous trucks. And he's a Silicon Valley kind of software guy. And that's who Mary Barra has been bringing in. You look at, a lot of Kurt Kelty and battery came from Tesla. They have a lot of Apple people there in the software side of the business, and now they've got Sterling Anderson. So I think she's in on this and hired him to push it. And look, he's not just the head of their autonomous stuff; he's head of all product development. He oversees development of EVs, internal combustion vehicles, software-related services for customers, all of it. Which, look, that was fascinating to me because they've got some other young talent in product development that I thought they were really grooming to run that part of the business and then maybe get to the C-suite at some point. And Sterling Anderson, kind of, to me, it looked like he leapfrogged some up-and-coming people at GM. And I think Mary Barra wants Silicon Valley smarts, knowledge, know-how, product development savvy in the company. You've seen it with a lot of her hires.
As part of the talent hiring spree that Mr. Anderson is going to go on, do you think that they will hire a head of autonomy that reports directly to him? And most importantly, do you think this person will be based out of the Mountain View office?
That's a good question. I mean, one thing, they'll hire talent for autonomy anywhere. I know that, whether it's Michigan or Mountain View or Austin, Texas. They want people who can do the job. They had, I don't know what the status is. They had a lot of people who could work on AI, robotics, and autonomy kind of stuff in Toronto too. So maybe they'd find people there, but they're on the hunt. As far as someone leading it, I don't know. I haven't heard anyone say that, but it wouldn't surprise me.
From a technical standpoint, is this going to be a new stack? Is this going to be built on the remnants of Cruise? Is this going to be built on Super Cruise? Any insights that you learned about that?
One thing that I do know is that, first thing, they want to do what they won't call, but you and I would probably call a level 3 system. So they want to, and that to me sounds like kind of super advancing Super Cruise. So, they want to get to, they already have a hands-free system. They want to get to a hands and eyes-free system, but still have the driver in the vehicle. And then from there, they want to go to a true, they won't say, but you and I will, level 4 system, which is true autonomy. That would be the next step. So I think what's going on is, they continue to develop Super Cruise, but they also, they do have a system from old Cruise. And, the Origin is still kicking around. I don't think you'll see that vehicle, but who knows? They could, but they still have that technology. And I think they could use that for a fully self-driving vehicle. It didn't die. The system actually worked. It was a little kludgy the last time I rode in one, but it worked pretty well. There's nothing inherently wrong with their technology. The accident that they had was a pretty freak thing. So, they could run and develop with both of those in a parallel way.
If they did in a parallel way, do you think that creates confusion in the market? Does that create internal rifts?
I don't think it's confusing in the market because people kind of know that Super Cruise, Blue Cruise, even what Tesla's doing is not full autonomous driving. I mean, what Tesla's doing now is getting there, but what Tesla's traditionally done here with autopilot and even I think FSD was not. That's not really like a fully autonomous, you can fall asleep at the wheel kind of thing. What they're working on now is, what they're piloting out there is supposed to be that. But, point is, you can work on both, right? And Waymo doesn't. Waymo is just making robotaxis, fully self-driving vehicles. But GM had, and Ford, when they owned Argo, they were, they had Blue Cruise, hands-free system that they could sell today, and they were working on a fully self-driving system. And I know at GM they are two very different systems. Super Cruise and Blue Cruise are integrating a lot of advanced safety technologies and pushing them beyond, which is very different than the whole stack and system that Cruise had.
If you look at Super Cruise, by the end of the year, it's on track to generate $200 million, projected to generate $400 million next year. Was that revenue growth, do you think, one of the defining factors? Say, hey, wait a second, there's something here with personally owned AVs. Because look at the revenue growth that we're seeing in Super Cruise.
Yeah, definitely. Look, car companies, for better and worse, have just craved getting into some sort of subscription business because it's money with less capital deployed, and investors love it. Right? If you have any kind of subscription service, think about Peloton, which failed, but it was a subscription service. Eventually, I think consumers get annoyed with some of these things. Like, what did BMW try to do? Was it heated seats they tried to make you pay for? And consumers, it's a tough thing to get consumers to do. Is, yes, you've acquired this hard asset with a heater in the seat and a bunch of sensors on it, but you can only use it if you pay us more. It just irritates people. But with autonomy, it might work, and I think it does with Super Cruise, because you can also shut that subscription off if you're not going to be using it for a while. And so that's what they want. And I think it would work that way. People would pay to not have to drive their car while they're sitting in it.
I pay the $99 a month for FSD, and I love it. It's worth every penny. I couldn't see myself buying the car unless it had those features, so I'm locked into the Tesla ecosystem. So Mr. Anderson comes to the Tesla ecosystem. It's a vision-only system. The Cruise stack, as you know, is very sensor-heavy. Do we potentially see a new sensor suite that's highly scalable, not having all the redundancies that the Cruise robotaxis had?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think that kind of fundamentally gets to, where is autonomy right now, right? I think Tesla's out there as an outlier saying you can do it only with cameras because that's the only way it's scalable. I think Elon might be right that that's the only way it's truly scalable because of cost. But, could Waymo be right that you need LiDAR and other sensors to make this work safely? I think, watching Tesla, we're over time here going to find out. Now, you've been in FSD, right?
Yep, I own FSD, and I've been in Robotaxi, and Robotaxi performed flawlessly down in Austin.
Explain it to everyone, the difference between what you experience with FSD versus Robotaxi. Robotaxi is a full self-driving vehicle. What can FSD not do? Is it just kind of, driving on local streets?
The FSD that I have, 13.2.9, is phenomenal. Is it the fork that I was in with Robotaxi? No. Is it really, really good? Yes. Am I comfortable and safe with it? Yes. It's made huge advancements. One of the biggest advancements that it's made over the last 6 months, where if you're going to school, because school time's right around the corner, and it would never stop when it had the flashing lights, children, you go from 25 to 15 miles an hour. Now it doesn't. To me, that was the big major breakthrough. It does not pull in my driveway yet, but it'll pull out of my driveway. So I'm waiting to see that go. But I would say less than 3%, 4% of the time when I'm actually in the Tesla vehicle, I actually drive it because I'm that confident with it. And I've done long stretches, complicated stretches. I've done Secret Service interaction checkpoints because you know where I live. And it works flawlessly in all these different edge cases that you really want to think about.
So where does it not let you go hands-free or eyes-free?
There are no limitations to the system.
Really? So FSD is all about driver confidence. But you're saying it doesn't pull into your driveway?
No, it pulls right in front of my driveway, say about 10 feet, 6 feet before it pulls right over, closes the thing, shuts the car off right there. It's incredible. So I wanted to park on the street, no problem, but it actually won't pull into the driveway, which is the weirdest little thing.
So there are some things it won't do. So it requires a human to do these things.
Yes, but it's getting better.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Okay.
It's getting much better now. Early on, when I would go to the airport, I could take a fully autonomous to the airport. It didn't know how to pull up to the curb. Now it does. You can't say Delta door or United door, but it knows how to pull up to the curb. So the rate of improvement, the rate of acceleration of how good the system's getting is mind-boggling, to the point where I question how anybody can compete on a personally owned autonomous vehicle standpoint. Just how fast the tech is iterating. Unless, if you look at GM's standpoint, I'm to the point now where I'm really thinking, does GM have to go out and license something to truly catch up to the advancements Tesla's making?
That's interesting. I mean, look, I think that's what Sterling Anderson wants to do, is do it in-house, get some of their own people and be able to compete.
Do you think they have the talent and the wherewithal to do it in-house? Because you're probably looking $4 billion, $5 billion, $6 billion to get this thing really ramped up?
I mean, isn't that much? They've already got a lot of work done, and they're not looking to build out a fleet of robotaxis the way Waymo does. They're just working on some cars. Look, I don't know what it'll cost. I think the answer to the question, do they have the talent? Based on the fact that Sterling Anderson is looking for talent, probably not. Like, they think they need more people. But I think he was pretty complimentary of the work Cruise has done in that same meeting. At least that's what I was told. So I think he feels they have a good foundation with both Super Cruise and Cruise. And he wants to just bring in more people to do it better and faster.
I love the idea of bringing more people in and adding a true competitor to the market. But did you learn anything about the trust factor? Says, okay, I'm a world-class engineer, and Mr. Anderson calls and makes me an offer package. Okay, this is acceptable. I'll go. But I'm thinking, okay, in 3 months, am I going to get the phone call, the email, Slack, and program shut down? Here we go again. How is he going to rebuild that trust?
Look, that's big, and another thing I know, and this does go back a few years when Dan Ammon was running Cruise. Remember when Cruise used to be called GM Cruise?
Do.
So I kept writing GM Cruise in stories, and the people at Cruise would call me and complain bitterly and say, "We're called Cruise." I'd say, "No, you're not. It says GM Cruise on your website, GM Cruise LLC. If you want," I said, "I will never get that past a copy editor at Bloomberg. They'll go to the website and say, David, you're going to have to write a correction here because it says GM Cruise, or it says just Cruise. It says GM." So I just say, fine. And they hated it. Why did they hate it? Because and I pushed them hard on this, and they finally said, look, when we try to hire talent, the GM name carries some baggage with technology people on the West Coast. So that was the case back then. So they did finally, by the way, took it off their website. They may have even officially changed their name to just Cruise. So then I was able to do that in my stories, and everybody was happy. But that was an employer brand issue at the time. I got to think, given the very high public meltdown of Cruise, layoffs of people, buyouts of top talent, Kyle Vogt taking the occasional shot, Cruise founder at GM whenever they've shut things down, probably doesn't help in that community. So yeah, Sterling Anderson knows a lot of people there. He has a good reputation. So do some of the Apple people that are working in software at GM, and they're going to have to call friends. And I think they're going to have to make a sales pitch to probably get some of these people. But yeah, I mean, this was a pretty high-profile flameout of Cruise, and that carries some baggage.
It does carry baggage. The last time around, before it shut down, they called it Cruise Automation LLC. So to go to your point, the GM name was removed, which raises the point. Are they going to have to just call it Autonomy or come up with a different name that's not associated with GM and basically make it the personally owned AV project, and then do say an employee incentive product where you're getting equity in a startup inside of GM, very similar to what they originally had it with Cruise?
That's a good question. I hadn't thought about that. Whether or not they need a new operation. I'm not sure so the idea that unit's ever going to go public, though, and get the payout seems pretty remote. Look, I think they'll have to pay a lot of money. One thing that could help them, you and I have been on this podcast and talking for a few years now about all of the autonomy companies that have died or cut back. So I think there are a lot of people out there who know how to do this or have experience doing it. So I think if somebody wants to, now those people can do other AI and other robotics jobs too and develop other types of products and services. But there are people out there. And so if someone really wants to develop self-driving cars, I think there's talent to be had. They're going to have to pay up for it because those people are rare and they can do something most people can't.
You're right. When you said a graveyard, it reminded me of the Ben and Jerry's flavor graveyard in Burlington, Vermont, all the flavors that went away. You could do the same thing for autonomy. A lot of these companies haven't survived, and there's companies today that will not survive. Let me ask you the hell freezes over question. Let's say Sterling has trouble attracting the talent. The engineering talent's there, can't get the systems to work. Could GM do the unthinkable and call up Mountain View and say, hey, Waymo, we want to do a licensing deal to build a personally owned AV, similar to, and we have very little details on this, the Toyota MOU deal. Could we potentially see something like that if he cannot get the talent and the tech to work?
If this didn't work for GM, yeah, I think they would have to do that. If they want a personally owned AV, they'd have to find a system that works. And, could it also be Wave or somebody else who develops it? Waymo's the leader here in the U.S. Could they license a Chinese system? I mean, that's a lot tougher because we've had some regulations passed that keeps that from happening. But you've got Wave, you've got May Mobility. You've got other companies working on this. I think it'd be a tough pill to swallow for GM to go to Waymo, but let's kind of forget about GM for a second and just any automaker that doesn't have a system. If you want to say GM could end up in that same group, fine. But you really have one operating system we know works well, and then we've got Wave and May Mobility that seem to have some pretty good technology out there. We've just seen less of it in fewer cities. So that by the time anyone has to make a decision on this a few years away, you could be choosing between 2 or 3 operating systems. Waymo's the leader, right?
Waymo's the clear leader. Let's not forget about Neuro. They got the Lucid Uber deal, so there's something going there.
That's true too, yeah.
I've been in that car.
Zook's still out there doing it as well. So, you have a few different possibilities. If someone had to make a decision today, it's Waymo. But if it's a couple, 3, 5 years from now, it could be any one of these companies we're talking about, if they all still make it and they're still around.
And here'd be an interesting thing, and I'm saying this purely from a coding standpoint, not a realistic standpoint, because I don't know if it's possible, but perhaps a Neuro, a Wave, a Waymo licenses GM the tech and then allows GM to fork it, essentially to put a GM layer on top of it and customize it for the GM needs. That gets an interesting opportunity. That creates a potential interesting business revenue model for all these licensors.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look at some of the AV trucking companies. Some want to integrate it themselves into the truck, and others kind of sell the system or license the system to like Plus AI. They license the system. They do help with integration, but their customers really do a lot of the integration work kind of in concert with them. But they're just licensing a system out. Waymo could do that. The others could as well. And, I think, look, one of the things GM, I think, wanted to do in addition to running a robotaxi business was maybe license its systems. And maybe they still do. It's just, I think it's always, there's always a question of, who do you allow to have an interface with your car buyer? And that was the issue with, it is the issue with CarPlay 2.0. Right, CarPlay 1.0 is a projection system. Okay, so I can play my music and text messages and make phone calls through my iPhone, project it onto my screen, and it works well in some cars and a little bit buggy in others, but okay, fine. CarPlay 2.0 starts, I think, doesn't it control side mirrors and some other stuff? I mean, starts to dig into the vehicle, which is why Tesla and Rivian won't do it, GM won't do it, and Mercedes has opted out. They don't want Apple digging into the car. So if you license Waymo's system, it's running on Waymo's network, and that system interfaces with the customers collecting that data of where they go and where they shop and where they eat, it starts to get hairy. And so let's say GM succeeded with this effort, and they could license theirs out. Who does another car company trust? GM or Waymo or Zoox? It gets, that battle over who's got the dashboard and the customer interface has been something we've been writing about for a while. There's a lot of data in cars. I mean, think about it. You're driving your car. If there is a person in the passenger seat and they're not buckled up, you get a warning, right? That means your car knows if you have a passenger. A lot of information, all kinds of stuff. How fast you drive, you name it. Like all that stuff can be found and where you're going. Consumers, there have been fights, lawsuits over consumer data on this kind of stuff, and the companies fight over it. So, that's just something to think about when we look at future licensing deals for autonomous and semi-autonomous systems. I mean, look, it is notable that everybody who has a sort of hands-free driving system, right? Audi, Mercedes, BMW, GM, Ford, it's all their own, right? Unless I'm mistaken, I think they're all doing their own system.
They're all doing their own system outside of Audi in China. They're running in the VW, they're running a Horizon robotics stack in China, but for the rest of the world, they're all building their own. Because you're right, that data is valuable. It's highly targetable. It's highly localized. And let's be very blunt, it's very personalized. So I'm convinced now that GM has to build it on their own. They do build on their own. When do we see the first car? 28, 29? Or am I getting a little too aggressive there?
No idea. I mean, it's just, it's so hard to predict. I think they want sooner rather than later, obviously, but, how soon they can, depend, like the cruise system works. And they do have cars out there with humans driving them. And I think it's using Cruise's software, but it's just to gather data using the sensor suite to mapping data and so forth. So they're doing stuff out there. How many of those cars are actually out there doing it? I don't know, but there's a lot of work being done, and I don't think they're in a hurry. They know it. The last time they did that, what it cost them. And you look at the trucking companies; they're not in a hurry either. They're all they've been working on this for a number of years, and you're looking at what 26, 27, 28, when most of those companies are going driver out on highways, on public roads. So it's a tough one. I think you and I are going to be talking about future plans for future years.
It's probably pretty much every time you come on, we're going to be talking about future plans because it's just, as you know, it keeps kicking the can down the road. But if you look at data today, the Super Cruise, 70% of all Cadillacs have Super Cruise enabled on them. Out of the four core GM brands, do you think Cadillac is going to be the first one to have this personally owned technology?
Yeah, I do, because those customers can afford the monthly payment on the service and the extra, whatever the extra charge is for the hardware. And I think, GM showed like a two-person concept car a few years ago. Might have been at CES, and it was a Cadillac. If it didn't have a badge on it, it sure looked like a Cadillac, and it may have had a Cadillac badge on it. So, and that's been usually the way GM rolls things out, although with the Chevy Bolt EV and with the Volt, the strong plug-in hybrid, those were both Chevys first because they wanted to try to get scale. But a lot of people look back at that and said it should have been, both of them should have been Cadillac models first. But traditionally, things like air conditioning going back many, many years, high compression engines, Cadillac was first on a lot of that stuff. And then they sort of bled it down through the other brands as they got scale on manufacturing it. In this case, it's a matter of, if you're charging, you said Tesla's charging you $99 a month, for someone who buys a $35,000 Chevy Equinox EV, if they're paying $350 a month on that, $400 a month, adding another $100, there's a reason they didn't buy the Blazer EV or a Cadillac, because they couldn't get to $500 a month. So it's tougher.
That's a good point. Do you think so? The Tesla model, the way it's set today for FSD, it's $8,000 one-time payment, or it's $99 a month. Does GM have to follow that pricing, or do you think they try and undercut it, or where do you see them going in the pricing perspective?
Geez, tough to say. I mean, by the time they have it out there, what's the cost of the hardware? What's the cost of the maintenance of the system? Can they undercut it? Do they start it off cheaply to get people in, and then they raise rates? I mean, that's a tough one. I mean, look, that Tesla system right now, $8,000 worth of hardware, that's expensive. That's an expensive option.
It is, but you don't have to pay for it. The hardware's still there in the car. So technically, if you were to buy the Model 3, the Model Y, the hardware's still there. You just have to pay to activate it. So it's built into the car. We don't know what the cost of that hardware 4 is. We know there's a hardware 5 coming. If you look at a GM, if they're going to build it sensor heavy, it's going to be more. I'll go out on a limb based on the specs of a Super Cruise system, and if you combine it with a Cruise system, I'll give you a ballpark of $3,500 probably for that hardware onto that vehicle. So then what's GM going to have to mark it up to $5,000, do you think, if on the Cadillac brand, and then charge a subscription on top of that?
Yeah, look, I mean, these things tend to be very profitable. So, they're going to be looking to mark it up for sure. And if they could mark it up and still undercut Tesla, I think they'd be very happy. There is another thing about this, though. Remember the story that my colleague Eric Shasker and I did on Hertz and the cost issues they had with repairing Teslas. One of the problems was, even if a Tesla got in a little fender bender, you have sensors for autopilot, and it could be hundreds or even over $1,000 just to replace that sensor. Now, the body shop could replace that sensor because it would come in one big assembly, and I think they would just, fix the bumper and put that piece in there. But they couldn't calibrate it. So they had to send it to yet another shop just to calibrate it. That was like another $1,000, $1,500 in some cases. That's what the people at Hertz were telling me. So you can end up, spending a few $1,000 just on the sensor portion of the repairs. And I don't know about you, but you can't get out of a body shop for under $500. It's $500 every time you walk in the door, and usually at least $1,000 for even what looks like minor work. Then you had a few $1,000s worth of sensor repairs. Are a lot of consumers going to want that risk?
No.
People are going to buy it. Look, people love these systems, but that's why this is something for luxury buyers right now.
And then you also the other thing you have to factor in on this, insurance costs. When you have these systems, your insurance costs go up. Give you an example. If you were to try in the state of Florida to go insure a Model 3 or Model Y, it's going to be double or triple at some insurers versus other insurers. There's these big gaps involved there.
Someone just sent me a study that Teslas were the most expensive cars to insure right now. And I don't have the details on it, but someone just sent me that study last week. And I don't know what jurisdiction it was in, but EVs generally are more expensive to insure. and then you add in a bunch of sensors and technology. It's, look, I know with insurance companies, they're not interested in making less money. So they tend to jack up the rates if you've got technology on the car that could be expensive to fix.
And that raises the question, just how does GM deal with the warranties, the repair, and the maintenance? Do they have to train new individuals on how to take care of this technology or build a program? How are they going to maintain these?
Yeah, I mean, that one's easier. I mean, it's just that, you go into a Cadillac dealership now, and I was just in one. My wife's got a Lyric, and I saw a couple Lyrics up on lifts having some work done. So, they've got the machinery and skilled workers who can do whatever work is being done, whether it's with just light service maintenance or repairs, or some software upgrades or whatever it was. They've got people who can do it, and they've got the machinery to handle it. So, and that was a big thing when GM was really pushing Cadillac dealers to go EV. Some of them just sold their franchises or closed them down. They didn't want to spend the extra money because it was decent. It was a decent chunk of change in order to get the equipment to repair EV.
It was a big truck change. So obviously, GM seems well prepared for the thing over time. Where you and I know their shareholders want the free cash flow to increase, they want the buybacks to go, they want the dividend to increase, and if they sell subscriptions, there's clearly a path there outside of the financial incentives. Do you think this push to personally own is being driven by the growing interest in FSD from consumers now, where consumers starting to talk about it?
Yeah, look, GM's I think has had a pretty good experience in terms of making money and customer satisfaction with Super Cruise. So they see a fully autonomous vehicle, and Ford has too. So have the others, right? They've all had a pretty good experience with this. It's been a pretty good business. GM talks about it a lot in terms of making money from software-related services in their cars. So, they've had a pretty good experience with that. And I think the customer satisfaction with it has been pretty good. So they want to expand it. And, autonomy is kind of like the holy grail of that. And then there's the threat part of it, right? So, those are the opportunities. But the threat is if you don't have it and 2-3 of your competitors do, suddenly your cars are less interesting, particularly on the high end. Cadillac's finally getting some traction here, and they're growing in markets where they haven't been before, like on the coast, because they've got some pretty strong selling EVs out there. And then, to blow it because you're behind in the, driver assist and autonomy game, I think there's got to be something they're looking at here is they don't want Tesla and anyone who would license Waymo technology to steal their buyers.
GM's ramping up. They got a clear strategy. Where does Ford fit into this? Where are they going? Because it seems that they're going to be left behind as GM really ramps up here.
I think everybody might have some work going on in the background on this, but others may be. This gets back to the licensing model, right? Do they license from Waymo, Wave, Zoox? And look, you think about where the Robotaxi, let's call it personally, commuter transportation AVs are right now. So you got Waymo in what, 6 cities? Is that where we are at the moment?
Just about.
And pretty limited geography within those 6 cities. And Waymo's doing very well. No one else is where they are. So if you're Jim Farley, I'm sure he's watching this. I'm sure there are conversations about internally and externally about what they could do to license or get a system in their cars. But if the creme de la creme of autonomy, Waymo, is in 6 cities in limited geography, you don't have to make that decision today, unless you're developing it internally. But you can kind of hang, watch, keep conversations going. And if, there's either a breakthrough or Waymo just gets to the point where they're in the 20 largest cities, then you can maybe cut a deal with them.
David, this is all really interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing you covering GM and where they ultimately go. But I'm asking a forward-thinking thing as we look to wrap up here. Where do you, at the end of the day, ultimately think GM is going, and what impact do you see this having on the market?
I think they're going to push hard to develop this, and as long as they are able to keep the talent, they keep Sterling Anderson, they keep the Apple software guys and some of the others, I think they're going to push pretty hard. How soon they get a system out there, like I think even if the technology is good, they're going to be very cautious with deployment. So this to me looks like end of the decade before we see something customer driven. And that's a dart throw on my part.
It's going to be interesting to watch. But what we do know, we're going to always have you back. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is personally owned AVs. David, as always, thank you so much for coming on the road to autonomy today.
Great to be here. Thanks, man.